Okay, in this video, I'm going to be using the 3D modeling software SketchUp in order to model one, maybe even two woodworking projects. Now, if you haven't seen the first video where I've gone into details covering the basic concepts of SketchUp when you're first learning it, as well as the basic tools and their functions, then that is linked for you down below. I've kind of formatted this series to work together to where that one is used for all of the lengthy details, and this one is going to be me strictly going through how to model something and verbally calling it out. Please feel free to pause the video at any point and repeat a step. Also, if anything confuses you, then please reference back to the first video where I go into detail on each topic. Real quick before getting started, this isn't about modeling quickly or efficiently. At this point, I'm just trying to get you started, feeling comfortable with the programs and understanding what tools are available and how they're used, especially in this case, in a woodworking project. So let's get going. All right, let's go ahead and open SketchUp by double-clicking on the icon. Whenever it pops up, I'm going to double-click on the woodworking one, which is going to, by default, put us in working in inches. When I think about where to start modeling something, I often think about how I would build it in real life. If I were to build a table in real life, I would build the tabletop first, place it upside down, and then build the legs and aprons on top of it. Then at the very end, flip it around. So that's how I'm personally going to model it. To start off building the tabletop, I'm going to hit R for rectangle. Remember to use those short keys. I'm going to start drawing the tabletop at the origin point of the 3 axes. I'm going to click once. Don't forget to release the mouse and don't hold it down. Drag out in the direction you want the tabletop to go, and then start typing in, let's say 4 feet, 6 feet, and hit enter. Now right now this is a 2D shape. You can use your navigation tool Orbit to look at it and see that it is 2D. In order to turn a 2D shape into a 3D shape, we're going to hit P for push pull. Hover your mouse over the surface and you'll see the blue dots. That lets you know that you're able to use this tool on this surface. I'm going to click once to grab that surface, and now you can start either pulling or pushing it. Let's go ahead and pull up in this case. Feel free to over exaggerate. And we're going to type in 3/4 of an inch and hit enter. But you know what? I think that looks a little bit too small. Let's go ahead and make this an 1.5 inches. We already pulled it up 3/4 of an inch. So to make it 1.5 inches, I'm going to simply click on it once again, pull up, type in another 3/4 of an inch and hit enter. And now this tabletop will be 1.5 inches thick. Now this is a brand new part that we just modeled in SketchUp, meaning that if we hit the space bar to go back to our select tool, we can click on each individual line and face separately from one another. Before moving on, we want to turn this tabletop into a component, putting it under a protective bubble and keeping all of these individual lines and faces together as one. To do that, I'm going to triple click it. Notice how everything is highlighted and dotted in blue. Now I'm going to hit G, which is the shortcut to make something a component, and title it tabletop and hit enter. Now whenever you try to click it, you'll see that everything is already highlighted in blue. That's your visual cue that it has been turned into a component. All right, let's go ahead and draw some legs. Now it's my recommendation to draw directly on your model whenever possible instead of drawing off in the modeling space and then bringing that part in. So since I want legs in each one of my 4 corners of my tabletop, that's where I'm going to use my navigational tools and zoom in to go. You can go to any one of the corners, and now I'm going to hit R for rectangle, and I'm going to start drawing the leg. Hover the mouse over into one of the corners, click once to start the tool, pull out into the direction you want to go. Again, over exaggerating is just fine. Then type in 3 inches, 3 inches, and hit enter. And you'll see that it pops to that size. Now let's turn the 2D shape into a 3D shape by hitting P for push pull. Let's grab onto the surface of the leg and start pulling up. Before clicking a second time to drop it, let's type in 36 inches and hit enter. And there we have the leg. Let's go ahead and triple click everything, right click, and say make component. Leg, enter. Now what we could do is hit R for rectangle, go over to this corner and draw another leg. However, don't forget that the move tool also has the copy feature in it. So instead of drawing something brand new, let's just make a copy of this leg and place it over into these other corners. To do that, I'm going to get into the move tool by hitting the short key M on the keyboard. Hit Option, Now we're going to move this leg. Remember to always grab it by a corner. That'll leave one behind and allow you to only move the copy. Since I have it grabbed by a corner, I can hover my mouse on the corner of this tabletop, click a second time to drop it, and now whenever I use my navigation tool, Orbit, and I zoom in, I can see that it's lined up perfectly flush. All right, now let's practice by placing it in the other two corners. I'm going to hit M for move. Grab it by a corner, click once to pick up the part, hit Option to copy it, and then hover your mouse into the adjoining corner. Use your Orbit tool to orbit around, hit M for move, grab it by a corner, click once to pick it up, Option to copy, and then hover your mouse in the corner and click a second time to drop it. Hitting that spacebar key to go back to your Select tool and getting you out of the Move tool. And there we have a table with the 4 legs. If we're building this table for real, we're actually going to want these legs probably inset a little bit and not flush to the edge. So let's set a few guidelines and move them in a set distance. I'm going to hit T for tape measure, hover on one of these edges. I'm going to click once to activate it, and you'll see that as I drag, that dotted line will appear. That's my guideline. Now be watchful on which axis you're on. You'll see here that I can very easily pop from green to blue. Green is either X or Y, depending on which direction you're facing, and then blue is always going to be vertical, the Z. So make sure that you are on the right axis. Then let's type in 3/4 of an inch and hit enter. We're going to need this on all 4 sides, so let's go ahead and practice and repeat setting these guidelines. Click once on the edge, pull in the direction you want to go, type in 3/4 and hit enter. Now we'll have a visual reference on where we need to place these legs to make them all perfectly inset. Hit the spacebar to go to your Select tool. Click once on the leg you want to move and hit M for move. Remember to grab it by a corner. Since I'm going to be moving it to the intersection of these 2 guidelines, I'm going to grab it from this outside corner and move it inwards. You can click once to pick it up, hover your mouse over this intersection, and you can wait for that inference call out to pop up if it makes you more comfortable, and then click a second time to drop the part. Use your navigation tool Orbit to orbit around to the other legs and repeat. Hit the spacebar to go to your Select tool, M for move, grab it by a corner, and move it in. Now to save yourself a step, you could have very well done this at the beginning, whenever you were first drawing the leg. However, the goal of this video is to allow you to practice, so I intentionally took you the long way around. Remember, it's a good habit to get into keeping a clean modeling space. So now that we're done with all of these guidelines, let's go ahead and clear them out. Go up to Edit and say Delete Guides. Now let's make an apron that goes from this leg to the inside of this leg. To do that, I'm going to model directly on the inside of one of these legs. Go ahead and use your navigation tools to orbit around and zoom in. Think about what the profile of the apron looks like, and let's draw that. Hit R for rectangle. Hover your mouse into the corner and then click once to start the tool. Then start pulling in the direction you want the rectangle to go. Now let's type in the dimension we actually want it to be. Let's make this 3/4 of an inch, 3 inches, and then hit enter. To take the 2D shape to a 3D shape, let's switch over to our P for push-pull tool. Click once on the surface and then start pulling it. Feel free to use your navigation tools while you have a tool open. You'll see that I'm going to zoom out and then zoom back in to be able to see the inside of the leg that we're going to be pulling this apron to. Remember that the push-pull feature allows you to either type in a set dimension or it will pop whatever you're holding to the surface of whatever you hover your mouse on. So I can hover my mouse to the inside of this leg and it will pop to the inside. So since we know the tool does that, let's hover our mouse on the edge of this leg and then click a second time to drop the apron. Now when you orbit around, you'll see that the apron extends from the inside of this leg perfectly to the inside of this leg. This is something brand new that we just drew in SketchUp, so let's quickly turn it into a component before moving on. Let's triple click it to select everything, hit G, and let's name it apron, and hit enter. Now we drew this apron flush with the legs, but let's go ahead and make a nice little inset. I'm going to zoom in so that I can make sure that I'm hovering my mouse over the right corner. I'm going to hit M for move. I'm going to pick it up by either corner, but I'm going to go ahead and choose the outside one. Start moving it over in the direction that I want. And now let's type in 1/2 inch and hit enter. This is going to move this apron in from its starting position to 1/2 inch in. Now let's go to the other side of the table and make a copy of this apron to place over on this side. Let me go ahead and show you 2 ways of doing this. One way would be to hit the M for Move tool, zoom in a little bit so that you can see where you're placing your mouse, click once on the corner, hit Option to copy it, and then start moving it over. Now if you place it flush with the outside of this leg, you could click a second time to drop it. Then you could zoom in a little bit, pick it up once again by clicking it, move it inwards, and then type in 1/2 inch and hit Enter. That's one way. Let me hit Control Z and show you the second way. You can hit T for tape measure and draw yourself a 1/2 inch guideline on the inside of this table leg. And that way, when you hit space bar to bring up the select tool, select the apron, hit M for Move, grab it by a corner, click it once to pick it up, hit Option to copy it. You can zoom out and then zoom back in so that you can see that you are in fact placing it on this guideline, and click a second time to drop it. Now you just eliminated the step of having to move it a second time. Then you just have to go up here, edit, and delete guides to have a clean modeling space. Now to get the aprons on the 2 short sides of the table, we can do one of 2 things. We can either draw them brand new from scratch, just like what we did on the long ones, or we can take and make a copy of these long ones and then shorten them. And that's actually the way I'm going to show you, just so that you can practice the Rotate tool. Remember that the Rotate tool also has a built-in copy feature, just like the Move tool. I'm going to hit the space bar to bring up my Select tool and select one of the longer aprons. Hit Q to bring up the Rotate tool. Make sure that the protractor is facing the right axis to rotate this apron over in this orientation. In this case, you're going to want it on the blue axis. Click once on the top of this apron to start the tool, then pull out in any direction. Click a second time to create a grab point, and then you can start pivoting it. However, we don't want to just rotate this one, we want to make a copy. So go ahead and hit Option before you drop the tool to create a copy of it. Now you can start rotating in the direction you want to go, and then type in 90 and hit Enter. And there we have an apron that we'll be able to place in between these 2 legs. To move it, let's go ahead and hit M for Move. Grab it by a corner that makes sense. In this case, I'm going to go for one of the bottom edges so that I can line it up to the inside of the leg. I'm going to click once to grab a hold of it, then hover my mouse on the bottom of this leg corner. I'm going to click a second time to drop it into place. However, remember that we inset these aprons in by 1/2 inch. So let's go ahead and orbit around to get a better perspective. Hit M for Move, and let's pick this up and move it inside by 1/2 inch. And click once to pick it up, type in 1/2 inch, and then hit Enter. Now let's go ahead and shorten it to be flush to the inside of the leg. Remember that whenever you make a copy of a component, any change you make to one will also be reflected in all the other copies. So if I were to edit this component and hit P for push-pull to shorten things, it's going to shorten the 2 long ones. We don't want that. So first I need to select it by hitting the space bar and bringing up my Select tool. Click on this one apron, right click, and say Make it Unique. Now whenever I double click it, I hit P for push-pull, hover my mouse over the end I want to shorten, click once to pick it up, and it won't change these other 2 that I want to remain long. Now we can hover our mouse on the inside of this leg and it will snap it perfectly flush to it. Hit the space bar to go to your Select tool and click anywhere outside of that shadow box to stop editing the component. Now let's orbit around so that we can get a good visual for the inside of this leg. I'm going to go ahead and set a guideline 1/2 inch in so I can move my apron directly to its location. I'm going to hit T for tape measure. I'm going to go to the edge, click once to start it, start pulling in the direction I want to go and type in 1/2 inch and then hit Enter. Hit spacebar to go to your Select tool, click on the short apron once, hit M for Move. Go to the appropriate corner and click once to pick it up. Now hit Option to copy it and start dragging over to that outside leg. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in, and then whenever my inference tells me I'm on the line, I'm going to click a second time to drop the apron. Now you can zoom out and see that we have a completed table. Oh, let's go ahead and get rid of that guideline by going to Edit and Delete Guidelines. Now what you can do is use a navigation tool to either orbit around 180 degrees, or a second way of doing it is by selecting everything. I'm going to hit spacebar to bring up my select tool, then draw a box around the entire table so that everything is selected. Now I'm going to hit Q for rotate. Now make sure that your rotate tool is on either the red or green axis. You can click once to start the tool, pull out in any direction, click a second time to create a grab point, and then start moving it. Now you can type in 180 and hit enter, and I'll pop it to that dimension. Now you can leave it, of course, anywhere you want to, but whenever I move things, I typically like to hit M for move, grab it by a corner, and then place it back into the origin point. And there we go, a nice and simple table. To give you a little bit more to practice on, I want to model together a simple cabinet with two shelves dadoed into the sides. I'm going to hit R for rectangle. Click once to start the tool and pull out. Let's go ahead and type in 24 inches, comma, 18 inches, and hit enter. Let's turn this into a 3D shape by hitting P for push-pull and pulling it up 3/4 of an inch. Hit enter. I'm going to hit my spacebar to go to my select tool, triple click it, hit G, and make it a component. I'm going to title this bottom and hit enter. This is going to be the bottom of the cabinet. Now let's build the walls of the cabinet. I'm going to hit R for rectangle and go to one of the sides. I'm going to click once to start the rectangle tool, then start pulling it out in the direction I want to go. I'm going to hover my mouse over this back edge so that I can click a second time and drop this rectangle. This way I know that it's the exact length that I need it to be, since it goes from this front edge to this back edge. However, it is definitely not the correct width. To change that, I'm going to go down to the bottom right, and I'm going to leave 24 inches alone. However, I'm going to select this second dimension and change it to be 3/4 of an inch and hit enter. Now all we'll need to do is hit P for push-pull, click once on the surface and start pulling it up. How tall do we want our cabinet to be? Let's just say we want it 36 inches and hit enter. It looks a little tall. Let's go ahead and click once on the top surface and pull it down 4 inches to make it 32 inches total. This is a brand new part that we just modeled. So before moving on, we need to triple click it, hit G, and make it a component by calling it a side. Now that we have the two main parts of the body made up, all we'll need to do is move and copy each one to make the top and the other side. Let's start off by making the other side. Hit the space bar and select the side if it's not already selected. Hit M for move, grab it by a corner that makes sense, hit Option to copy it, and drag your mouse over to the corner of the bottom. Click a second time to drop the part in place. Hit the space bar to bring up your select tool and click on the bottom. Now hit M for move, grab it by a corner that makes sense, hit Option to copy it, and drag it up to the top. Click a second time to drop it into place. And this will be the body of the main box. Now let's say we want to add two shelves in here that will sit onto dados. I first want to line out where I want the dados to be placed and then draw them in. I'm going to use my navigation tools to orbit around and get a good visual of the inside of one of the sides. I'm going to hit T for tape measure and set a few guidelines on where the dados need to be placed. Go to this bottom edge of the side and click once to start the tool. Drag up and then type in 8 inches and hit enter. That'll be the start of the first dado. Since we're using 3/4 inch plywood, we're going to need it to be 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to click once to start the tool, drag up, and type in 3/4 of an inch and hit enter. If I want my second shelf to be 8 inches above this one, now I'm going to go to the top guideline, click once again in order to start the tool, drag up, type in 8 inches and hit enter. Now let's repeat to draw a second guideline 3/4 of an inch above that one. Now that we can visually see where we need to draw lines to make up the dados, we can start editing this component, which is the side, and use the line tool to draw them in. To do that, let's double click on the side. You'll see that shadow box pop up, which is the visual cue that you're editing a component. Now you can hit the L for line tool, hover your mouse over the intersection of the side and the guideline, and then drag it across to the opposite end. Click a second time to drop the tool. Go ahead and repeat on all of the other 3 guidelines. You'll see as we do this to one component, it's reflecting the changes to its copy, which is that second side. Now it is facing the wrong direction, but we can deal with that at the end. After you're done drawing your lines, let's use the P for push-pull feature to recess these dados in. You'll see that as you move your mouse around, you'll have different options for which surfaces you're allowed to grab onto and utilize it on. Grab onto one of the dado surfaces, click once to start the tool, push in, and let's type in 3/8 of an inch and hit enter. Now let's go up to the second dado and repeat. Click once to start the tool, 3/8 of an inch, hit enter, and now we'll have two dados the same depth. Click anywhere outside of that shadow box to stop editing. To keep a clean modeling space, let's go up to edit and say delete guides. Now, of course, we want the dados on the second side to be facing the inside. We could use the rotate tool. However, there's another feature in SketchUp where you can hit your space bar to bring up your select tool, select the side. Now you can right click and you have the option to flip along apart along any three of the axes. In my case, I'm going to need to flip this along the green axis in order to get the dados facing the inside. So I'm going to right click, say flip along, and hit components green. However, if you don't know which axis to flip along, always feel free to click on one, and if it's not the correct one, remember that you can hit Control-Z to back up one step, and then you can try one of the other axes. Now that these sides are facing the correct direction, now I can start drawing in the shelves that go in between them. Of course, a few ways that you can do this and everything else. One, you could hit the T for tape measure, go to the far side on one of the dados, and then drag the tape measure tool across to the other side to get an exact dimension of a rectangle that you need to draw. However, a much quicker way of doing it is to draw a rectangle directly in between each one of the dados. Let me show you how to do that. Go ahead and hit R for rectangle, zoom in so that you can make sure you're drawing it in the right starting point. And I'm going to go to the top of one of these dados and click once to start the tool. Now I'm going to zoom out and then zoom back in over on the other dado's corner and click a second time once I'm hovering my mouse on it. You'll see that it drops this 2D rectangle squarely in between the two. Now we can use our P for push-pull, grab onto the surface, and then just hover our mouse on the edge on the outside of the side. If you click a second time to drop it and then orbit around, you'll see that it ends up being perfectly flush. Now, of course, this is something brand new that we just modeled, so let's turn it into a component before we try to move it and copy it down to the other dado. Spacebar to bring up the select tool, triple click it, hit G, and let's call it shelf, and then hit enter. Now we can select it and then hit M for move, grab it by a corner, hit Option to copy it, start dragging down until we hover our mouse into the corner of the next dado, click a second time to drop it into place, and now we have two shelves. Now, if you go out to your shop and you're actually building this cabinet, what I would typically do is hit T for tape measure, and then I would measure across this shelf and know that I need to cut my board to this exact dimension to fit perfectly between these dados. It truly saves a lot of time to model it first. Now figure out the orientation on what you want to either be the front or back, and let's draw a back on it. Again, I'm just going to draw it directly on the model. I'm going to hit R for rectangle. I'm going to click once in a corner to start the tool, and then click a second time in the opposite corner to stop the tool and drop it in place. I'm going to hit P for push-pull, click once on the surface and pull it outwards in this case, and then type in 1/4 of an inch and hit enter. It's brand new, something that we just modeled, so let's triple click it, hit G to make it a component and title it back, and then hit enter. Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and stop there for this video. I really hope that this at least gets you going and gives you something to practice. Really, for me, being self-taught in SketchUp, the kind of defining moment where I really started absorbing the information and not just understanding the concept of the tools was whenever I modeled something that I personally built in real life. So that's what I recommend you do. Find something, the simplest thing that you have built, and try to model it. Be looking at it and use these tools to model it. And if you get confused, then of course reference back to the longer formatted video where I go into detail on the concept and the tools. Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you think. And of course, check out the rest of the learning resources that SketchUp already has available. I'll see you soon.